Thank you, Alexia. As someone that works remote every single day with my teams and someone that uses Trello every single day, I found a lot of that very, very informative and helpful for me. My name is Christopher Brooks. I work with UNICEF, and I work as part of a team that's called the Global Innovation Center. It's a group within the UNICEF Innovation umbrella, where we do some of the most interesting things, I think, that are happening at UNICEF today. I want to talk to you about we're calling it extreme remote working, but it sounds like a lot of the same practices and a lot of the same technologies that we're using are in use at Trello, and I'm sure some of the companies that you work with as well. But I'm going to go through a case study about a recent execution we had where we had to work in a very, you might call it a sprint if you were doing development, but we had to do a really fast emergency execution. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about our day-to-day usage of Trello and other platforms to help us work better remotely. So the function of the GIC within UNICEF Innovation is that we help build global scale for ideas that have come out of UNICEF Innovation. So there are a couple different groups within that umbrella. There's the Futures group that takes the very beginning ideas of entrepreneurs all over the world and tries to get them from like the seed stage to having some kind of an idea that's somewhat executable. We have the Ventures team that takes those executable ideas and invests in them and starts to begin the scale process. And then at the very bottom of the diagram here, we have my team, which is when we get to the scale area of how can we make this work across multiple countries? How can we make it work potentially even globally and in different situations? We are a fully remote working team of 17 people. We have 11 locations that we're all based around the world, including Bangkok, Hanoi, Dakar, Santiago, and Copenhagen. We have 71% of us telework, 53% are nomadic, and 41% work full-time. So even outside of the remote aspects of things, we have a lot of flexibility and interesting ways of people engaging with the team, even if it's not every single minute of every day in the office. We work daily with 190 countries, which is quite a lot, in every region of the world, and that means that we're across 39 time zones, because that is all the time zones that there are. So my role at GIC, I work on a project called U-Report. U-Report is a youth-focused platform that allows us to send information and receive information from young people all over the world. U-Report is considered to be owned by young people, but it's administrated by a steering committee that's made up of a couple different partners like UNICEF, the Scouting Organization, Girl Guides, and other youth-focused organizations around the world. We use U-Report in a couple different contexts, but the major way we use it is we use it to amplify the voices of young people to decision makers, because we at UNICEF believe that young people should have a voice when decisions are being made that affect the world that they will grow into or live in today, for example. So my major responsibility as part of the U-Report team is scaling the platform. And my experience before UNICEF was around digital marketing, and that makes me a very logical choice for the person that's in charge of paid media recruitment. And then my background in digital also makes me connected with a lot of other things that we do within U-Report. I'm going to talk a little bit about Rapid Pro. Rapid Pro is the technology that underlies U-Report and allows us to connect with different messaging platforms to exchange information with young people. It's an open source platform. Essentially allows us to create messaging flows. It's a little bit like when you call an automated telephone number and you're asked to press 1 for this and 2 for that, except it's text-based, so we can provide more information and receive more information, and it's also much smarter. It connects into multiple messaging platforms like Facebook Messenger, Viber, SMS, which means that we can reach a larger portion of the population around the world. Either it's people that don't have smartphones and can connect by SMS, or it's people that are in a country where Viber is much more popular and powerful than Facebook Messenger, for example. We have U-Report projects, we call them. They're individual country projects in 39 different countries around the world. And each one of those requires a different instance of Rapid Pro to be proposed within the UNICEF framework for that kind of thing, and funded within the UNICEF framework for that kind of thing, and then actually implemented with the technology side. It's a huge amount of work, and you'll see in a second how it all looks. Rapid Pro, beyond the stuff that we do at U-Report, is also used for other tools that we have within UNICEF, like EduTrack, mHealth, and 1,000 Days. So it's very robust, allows us to do a lot of good work, but it also takes a lot of work to set up, and it takes a lot of work to manage. So this Trello board I wanted to share is what's called our Rapid Pro deployment pipeline. We think of this as a workflow, moving from left to right as workflows tend to, taking everyone, a different country through the stages from initial interest all the way to formal interest, as we would call it at UNICEF, to exploring and prototyping and scoping and design research. The process involves so many different steps along the way, and also so many different stakeholders, both in our group and in the groups at each different country, that it's a tremendous tool for us to be able to organize this information as it is here, and to have everyone be able to contribute and view at the same time simultaneously. And you can't see it here, but this goes, I think, another 7 lists off to the side to the right. We use it as a knowledge repository as well. Whenever we have a conversation with one of the countries we're working with, we'll write down what the conversation was about, so that the next person that speaks to that country, all they have to do is go look at that card for that country to get caught up to where the discussions are for that particular phase. So all in all, we have 222 individual country and product combinations that we're tracking here. So it's a little more than the rule of 5, but it allows us to keep a permanent record as well. So not only do we have the projects here that are in process, we also have projects that are parking lotted, where for example, the team wants to do it, but they're waiting for something 6 months down the road before they can actually execute. We use it as a process, but also a way to organize all our information for this project. Beyond Trello, as a way of communicating within the U-Report group, but also as a way of communicating within the Global Innovation Center, we use different tools for different purposes. And Alexia was saying that at Trello, one of the guiding principles is that you should communicate with people on the platforms they want to be communicated to on. We took that a little differently. We had people that were working remotely already, and a lot of people had a lot of preferences for the platforms they wanted to use. The approach we took was we all got together. We had a summit in Amman, and we said, we want to pick out the best platform for us for each of the different tasks that we think we have to do as we go about doing our work. And the result of that is, and I've kind of taken the initiative to plot this on 2 different charts here, but we have tools that allow us to temporarily save information versus permanently save information, and we have tools that allow us to collaborate versus store information and data. As I was making this chart, it occurred to me that process in Amman, what it allowed us to do was remove a lot of the duplication that we have in the tools that we use. So WhatsApp here is very temporary and very communicative, but there's no other messaging app that we use that's only used for that kind of connection between people. We use Skype in terms of sharing content occasionally if it's very simple and we don't need to keep it forever, but we want to share it. And we also use it to hold more formal meetings than we would on WhatsApp, because it's a better tool for that, but it also helps us store some of the knowledge from those meetings. We use Trello, which I see as kind of being in the middle of the chart here, because it's so extensible. You can essentially get whatever you want out of it. We use Outlook for keeping things on the record, absolutely. That includes things like submitting your travel documents, all the way to having a permanent record of the budgets that we use for our work. Finally, we have G Suite and SharePoint. They're the 2 document collaboration softwares we use. We probably use G Suite a little more because of just some of the functionalities there, but they're both ways that we collaborate, not so much in real time on documents, but sharing and reading and looking at the same content at the same time. Just on the chart here, I do want to be clear, we don't use any tools that are just about storage, and that was another interesting thing for me to realize as I was putting this together. I think if I had put this chart together 5 years ago, working in a different industry, it would have looked very different, much more on the storage side. But our focus, because we're so remote, is so much about collaboration and not so much about keeping things permanently in one location. So I wanted to go through a case study, and this is less about Rapid Pro implementation and more about a situation that we had to deal with recently at U-Report. This was the beginning of September, I believe, and I was in the US. I wasn't actually in Copenhagen like I normally am. And we received a little bit of a, like a distress Skype message from our colleague who works in the Latin American Caribbean regional office saying, we've identified the hurricanes, at this time it was Irma, is going to impact on the countries that she covered within, I believe it was 2 days. And she was wondering, what could we do to address the problem using U-Report as a tool? We'd never done anything like this before. We'd worked a little bit with landslides in terms of disasters, but we had absolutely no content for hurricanes. We had never created an ad that would help recruit people into the system to get information about hurricanes. And we didn't have a process for putting 99% of your daily effort into accomplishing one thing across a team. Meaning that everyone was focused on this initiative from the second we committed to it. So what we did when we set it out was we said, let's come up with some goals that we can use as our guiding points towards success here. So we said we want to scale. We want to, by the end of this process really, we want to be a state that we recruited new people into the platform, which meant they got information about hurricane preparedness, or they were able to give information about the situation in their country after the hurricane hit. We want to recruit them on Facebook and Viber. We want to engage them. By providing regular and immediate information, and by answering individual questions that come through the platform, which was one of the most work-intensive parts of this whole thing. Rapid Pro tries to automate as much as it can of the process, but in an emergency, you're always going to have people that have questions that are kind of uncaught, and you want to make sure that you can answer as many of those as possible. And we wanted to impact actual change in the end. So we wanted to be able to say that information generated an informed response in terms of the humanitarian efforts that happened after the storms were finished. And we wanted to be able to say that we helped those affected to better prepare for the storms as they were arriving in their countries. So we executed in a few ways. For scale, we ran ads across Facebook and Viber. We ran them in 3 languages because between the Caribbean islands and Haiti and Latin America, you have English, Spanish, and French. So we brought on volunteer translators to help with that. We targeted these ads differently to each country based on when the hurricane was going to hit. And at the end of the process, we actually began to provide information about hurricane impact times in the ad itself. We engaged through a dialogue about these individual questions that people would have, like what illnesses might there be after the hurricane, or my daughter is asthmatic and unwell, what should I do in this situation? And finally, we engaged people using polls, which is one of the things that we do most often in U-Report, trying to understand at scale what are the challenges faced by people in the recovery zones. And it might be that they don't have water, it might be they don't have food, or they don't have electricity, for example. Time zones were a major factor in this. We had the benefit of everyone being entirely invested in this, which meant that everyone's full workday, and then probably about 4 or 5 hours after the workday ended, was dedicated to this response, which meant that we had naturally more overlap than we would have normally. The top box here is the GIC team. That's my team that actually worked on it. We had the Latin American Caribbean Regional Office, and on the bottom here, we also had volunteers that were working with us that were based in different parts of Europe and in 2 different Latin American time zones. So as we were executing this, we had to think very carefully not only about when we were going to do which tasks to make sure that we get approval from the right people at the right times, but also what were the tools that we were using to continue to share that information down the road if we were in a brainstorm session. So James Powell was my boss. He works in Bangkok. And if I was in New York and I was coordinating with Lucha, who's in Santiago, and Vicky, who is in Panama City, we wanted to make sure we had a record of everything that we were doing and everything we were talking about that we could share with James when he came back online at 8 o'clock in the morning his time, or probably earlier than that. So to do all this, we use 3 tools. We use Skype, and this was used for immediate and real-time coordination. We spent almost all of our time in Skype chats with each other, and we had broken out a little bit into different topics, but it wasn't really organized that well. It was almost just like we didn't have time to put together the proper organization for this in the beginning. We did ephemeral assets, which I'm calling things like if we had translated one line from an ad and someone sent it to me and all I had to do was copy and paste it into the Facebook ad manager, we wouldn't even keep a record of that. We wouldn't worry about putting that into a longer term, more permanent storage location. We also used it for brainstorming and problem solving. But one of the things that was key, and Alexia touched on this as well, is that as we were brainstorming and problem solving, we realized that there's a kind of a tendency to say, this is all written down anyway, because we're doing it on Skype. So we don't need someone to be the scribe in this scenario. Pretty quickly we realized that it's really important to take out the most important facts and the most important to-dos and ideas from those conversations and move it on to something like Trello, which we used for mid and long-term coordination. So we used it to organize and collect our thoughts. We used it to track which countries were in which phase, whether they were in the preparedness phase, where we were sending them information about how to stay safe before the hurricane, or whether they were, for example, in the needs assessment phase when we were asking them what is missing in your life because of the hurricane. We used Outlook pretty sparingly. We used it for record keeping, so making sure that the budgets were all written down and permanently recorded in Outlook was very important. We also used it for external communication. So we, I think it became pretty clear that we were moving so quickly and we were kind of all new to this process that it was a little bit like a hurricane within the process within the team. And to really brief people who were outside that process on what we were doing required us to digest the information that we had created and put it in a different form, rather than giving them a Trello board or giving them a Skype conversation. So we used Outlook for that. This is the board that I created for the post-emergency U-Report coordination. One of the big things I learned as I was creating this is that this made a lot of sense to me. And as we kind of had agreed that we needed to have a more permanent solution for keeping our ideas and brainstorms on track, I put this together. And because I was the only person that had put input into the design of the board, I was the only person that was updating the board. And everyone else was looking at the board. But I ended up being the scribe for everything that was going on here, which was fine by me. But it was a big learning for us that having something organized ahead of time and having a mediated process where everyone decides how we should organize the information is important to get buy-in and usage of those boards. So the impact of the action, very briefly, we were able to recruit about 22,500 U-Reporters, which meant that we sent out information to that many people about how to prepare for the hurricane or how to stay healthy after the hurricane. At our peak recruitment, one new U-Reporter joined every 6 seconds, which for us is a phenomenal success. We engaged 8,000 individual questions, whether we answered them, on the platform. That was with a team, our team individually, internally rather, but also with 8 volunteers that were French and Spanish speaking. 90% said the info that they were sent from us was useful, and 80% said they'd shared that information with more than one other person. Some people anecdotally told us that they sent it with their entire contact book in their phone. We felt very good about that information particularly. And the change that we impacted, the nutrition team that was doing the humanitarian efforts in the Latin American Caribbean after the hurricanes hit, used the information that we had collected to advocate for more nutrition coverage as part of the recovery packages. And we haven't done this yet, but we're going to poll to assess the behavior change within the next couple weeks to get an idea of how our messaging was actually able to change the behavior of people on the ground in those situations. So I've mentioned some of this, but these were our big takeaways from a process that we were kind of thrown into, that we had no preparation for, but that we knew we had to do the very best that we could in the shortest time that we could do it in. Having working hours overlap in an emergency critical response was very, very helpful for us. If you had a team that's more distributed around the world, I imagine that you can have different teams that hand over at different times, kind of like shift work. But for us, the majority of our coverage was in Asia and the US. So we had to have enough overlap in people's schedules with that challenging time zone difference. We designated someone to pull out ideas from brainstorm sessions, as I said, and put those on Trello. We said, do establish the organization systems ahead of time, like I was saying. Build a Trello board that everyone wants to use. And we said, don't overcomplicate things and take time to simplify. I think when you're sitting by yourself in an environment, you're talking on Skype and you're using text communication, but you're not actually war rooming physically with someone, I think it can be tempting to kind of go down a rabbit hole of your own design towards ideas that are really good, but take the kind of the process to a place where it doesn't need to be. We said don't expose the inner workings outside the group, keep the process internal and moderate information coming in, but also coming out. So we had people that were connected to the Latin American response for UNICEF. We had people that were connected to the people that were more senior in the Global Innovation Center. And we made sure that we weren't overwhelming them, and also that the connections that they were making to us wasn't overwhelming us. And also don't use just one chat. We kind of did most of our Skype coordination in one single chat. I think it would have been very helpful and valuable for us if we had broken that out a little more granularly, because we covered so many different topics in one big long kind of text box. Great, thank you. That is all my stuff. I think we have a Q&A now. Does anyone have any questions about what I just shared? It was very comprehensive. Okay, all right, wonderful. Thank you, everybody.